In this episode of Home Theater Geeks, I chat with Brent Butterworth about his new project, the Headphone Evaluation and Spatial-Audio Test Album. So stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with Brent Butterworth, a longtime audio journalist who recently completed a project that I found very interesting called the Headphone Evaluation and Spatial-Audio Test. And it consists of a bunch of wave files, audio files, that we're going to talk a lot about. But first, let me welcome Brent to the show. Hey, Brent, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Happy to be on. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So this album, which I guess we could call it an album, even though it's not in physical form, right? You can't buy a CD, right?
Oh, there was a lot of discussion about that, too.
Yeah. I mean, I myself am still a believer in physical media, but I also recognize the fact that not a lot of people are anymore. I mean, I go to concerts and they still have CDs. In some cases, they're giving them away.
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm also a jazz artist, and
it's true, you are.
It's a decision to press CDs, and it's only about, I think we just paid $300 something to get 200 pressed with really nice covers and everything. Mm-hmm. But then you got to mail them out, and then you got to have an operation to do that, and that's fine on my level. But on the level of a real record company like David Chesky's project here, the Audiophile Society is what it's actually called. On that kind of level, that's logistics, and with downloads, there's no logistics. You just get it. So we talked a lot about. You feel like you want to call it a test disc, right? Because we're so used to test discs.
Right.
But and we kept calling it that, but then someone kept saying, no, it's not a disc. We're not pressing discs, and so.
So you called it an album
right now. We don't know what else to call it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned David Chesky and the Audiophile Society, and let's start there. David Chesky is very well known, an audiophile legend, I would say. Yeah. He's also a musician and a composer, and he has produced a ton of audiophile recordings. And recently, I guess he started this new company called the Audiophile Society, right? Mm-hmm. It used to be Chesky Records. Maybe that's still in existence as well.
It still is, but I don't think he's moving forward with that. You can still buy the records.
Sure.
But as I understand it, this is a whole new enterprise. Because, David changes what he wants to do about every 5 years or something.
Well, he is kind of a mad genius, I would say. And this one, the Audiophile Society, if I'm not mistaken, is geared specifically toward music meant to be heard or listened to on headphones.
Right. Although you can listen to it on speakers.
Sure.
It's, he's always been trying to kind of strike a balance between that to where, because, traditionally binaural recordings sound pretty weird on speakers, but he's always been trying to reach kind of a bit of a happy medium, but they really are better on headphones, I have to say.
Right. His recordings.
Yeah. The new ones. Because, he's doing these, this actually kind of arose out of the pandemic because he couldn't go to the fabulous venues that he normally records in. So he had to do everything in digital audio workstations, the same way that, Billie Eilish would record an album.
Right.
And he developed techniques to do that with a digital audio workstation that are not Atmos or DTSX or anything like that. But he developed techniques that let him get a really big immersive sound with headphones without using those proprietary formats.
Right. Which we're going to talk about because it's one of the things that's on this album. So how did this project come to be, the Headphone Evaluation and Spatial-Audio Test album, which we see the quote-unquote cover here?
Yeah.
if it were a CD, this is what the cover would look like.
Yeah. You still have to have a cover, even though you don't have a physical product.
Right.
So it came about when, David, I've known David for probably something like 30 years, and I've worked on projects with him in the past. We did when I worked for Dolby, we did a test disc together for DVD audio and SACD. When I worked for Home Entertainment Magazine, we had like a home entertainment / Chesky demo disc of some sort. And I've just known the guy forever, and I really love his work, and I've written about it for ages. So he called me out of the blue on early in January, right after the new year. And he said, hey, I'm thinking about doing like an immersive audio test album just for headphones. And, we started talking about it. He's like, could you do something like that? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty confident I can figure out how to do that, because I had kind of just messed around with Atmos slightly. I had seen other people do it, so I knew how the software worked. I kind of knew the general procedure, but it ended up being about 7 or 8 month project of figuring out how to do it, figuring out what would work. We did at least a dozen runs of this thing in various forms with different kinds of tones and I went and did a bunch of live recordings with my my handy mouth simulator. So I could.
What is that?
It's a mouth simulator. It's like a little speaker that simulates the acoustics of the human mouth. So I put this up on a stand and went to my local Everett Public Library here in Everett, Washington, which has a nice big performance room that you can just go use. And I did a really complex series of recordings with this, using this thing all over the place on stands, and marked everything out. And oh boy, it just took forever. And I did that. And then I did a bunch of test tones to kind of compare to that. And the whole time, David and I were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we had some other people, I had a couple reviewer friends of mine who were kind of into immersive sound, check it out and try different things and give me what their reaction was to it. And then David had some pro audio guys in New York who checked it out. And it was a really long process, but I'm really happy with the final product.
So the final product has 47 tracks, all in 48 kilohertz, 24-bit resolution wave files, which are uncompressed digital audio. Why did you choose that resolution?
Well, 2448 is sort of a standard resolution for professional production these days. And there was no discussion. David said that, and if David says that's what he wants, then that's what I'm going to do. If it had been something really wacky, like 32, 780, whatever, I probably said no.
Right. But that would have just taken up so much data, so much space.
I mean, I do a lot of, I just did a new jazz album, and we did that in 2448 as well. And it's just such a common thing. And if you get on things like Qobuz, you'll find there's just tons of material in 2448. So we did that. Also, because it wouldn't be, as you suggested, it wouldn't be a giant download compared to some crazy resolution. And, for the purposes of this, it is completely... actually, I've converted some of this stuff to MP3s, and it works in MP3 as well.
Here's a question from the chat room. You mentioned the album you just did. Loquacious is asking, what instrument do you play?
I play double bass. I play guitar. I play ukulele. I play percussion. I can only really get a gig on double bass, maybe ukulele a little bit, but I could I've done tons of gigs on double bass, but I'm a bass player who does other stuff because he has to. Right.
I think you played the stick at one point too, right?
I played the Chapman stick for 20 years, and then I realized if you get a double bass, people know what that is. And they're like, oh, you could come play in my band. You could come play that in my band. Whereas if you have a Chapman stick, no one understands what it is.
Yeah, too bad, because a Chapman stick is an awesome instrument. But we're getting off track here. Okay, so you have 47 tracks, some of which are David Chesky, I believe, sort of giving instructions about what you're about to hear, right?
Yeah. So half of, not half, maybe a third are, for each one. This is what Chesky's done because Chesky's been doing test albums for
decades,
30 years at least. And so usually there'll be an announcement that says, okay, here is what this test is, and here's what you're going to hear. And so we'll say, okay, look, you're going to hear test tones. Like in a lot of cases, we have them at 0 degrees straight ahead, 15 degrees right, 30 degrees right. And then we'll have them since it's immersive, we'll have them going up, right? We'll have it at 45 degrees above. Some of the things we have, 90 degrees directly over. So we have overpasses, right to left. We have overpasses front and back. We have passes all around you. And
he announces all these things.
He announces all, and he tells you what results to expect. And you may be thinking right away, well, if it's the old stereo salesman's trick, right? It's tell people what they're going to hear, and then they'll hear it.
Right.
So we actually, knowing this, we put 2 blind tests on there to where you can, it'll just say, position 1, position 2, position 3. We tell you which positions we used, but we don't tell you which one is which, right? So we tell you, okay, we did, 15 degrees right or 30 degrees right or whatever, and 45 degrees up. So we tell you what all the different possibilities are, but we don't tell you which is which. And then we did it. The interesting thing, and I think the most shocking thing to me by 1,000 miles on this thing was, halfway through the project, David said, hey, have you tried the Apple encoder? And because, Dolby has their own encoder to convert multi-channel Atmos files into just 2 channels for headphones, right? Binaural encoder. Apple has their own. And I said, no, because I kind of assumed they'd be kind of the same, right? And Apple just did their own for whatever. He's like, you really better check it out. So I learned how to use Apple Logic, which has that option in it.
Right.
And because I was using Reaper, and then I used PreSonus, whatever the PreSonus
Studio One.
Audio. Yeah. And so I did it, and I was just like, oh my God. It was just shocking how different the 2 sounded. And I can't say one or the other is better.
They're just different.
They're just different. They do different things better. And some of them, and I was, as an ex-Dolby employee, I was a little shocked that, in my opinion, the Dolby one was actually more transparent. Because Dolby doesn't get usually too whacked out on all the audiophile stuff, right? They're kind of into making
consumer stuff. Yeah,
consumer straight ahead, low price consumer stuff, and but
they're also involved in the high end professional market as well.
True.
They're 2 different divisions, sort of.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. But they have on the album, you can actually compare the 2 different encoders.
I found this very interesting that you have several tracks that compare something made in the Dolby binaural and the Apple binaural. And in fact, they do sound different. I was astonished by that. One question I had for you about the Dolby one. Dolby used to have a 3D headphone system called Dolby Headphone.
Yep.
Is this an outgrowth of that?
No.
It's completely different.
There may be some. I can't say for sure. This is way beyond Dolby Headphone. Dolby Headphone basically took it took up to 5.1 or 7.1.
Correct.
And then folded that down into 2 channels to give you sort of a surround sound effect.
Right. But I always thought it was pretty good. I always thought it sounded quite good.
It was okay. It worked kind of okay for me, but which was interesting because I had to go sell it. But
right.
But it was based on a technology from a company called Lake in Australia that Dolby bought, and it was for the time. It was a really good binaural encoder. Yeah. And there or headphone virtualizer, if you want to call it that. Right. And however, that was done around the year 2000. And, obviously we have 20 some odd years of advancement in computing power. So now even, little tiny earbuds will have pretty awesome computing power. And of course, we have phones, which we didn't have back then.
Yeah, true enough.
And we were all on soap bar phones and stuff back then.
Right.
And so there's all kinds of things that you can do that were impossible at the time. And there's been advances in psychoacoustics. There's been advances in computing power. So some of the key principles, the key principles in any headphone virtualizer are similar. There are always a lot of commonality, even going back to the old ones that like Headroom used to do with their crosstalk canceller. Remember that? Those amps?
Yeah.
Tile Hertzens did them way back in the day.
I remember.
And so the fundamental principles are the same. This is just a lot more advanced. And I think when you hear the difference in the Dolby and the Apple ones, you go like, oh, this is not a linear progression to better and better. This is more like a
bifurcation, shall we say?
Yeah. It's really cool.
Wow.
I wanted to say, though, that, like one of the, I hope you weren't going to ask this question, and I'm stomping on you here, but
no, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I think the fascinating thing to me was, since I had to keep, I knew that different people's ears have different, so-called, head-related transfer functions, right? Which is how your ears figure out that a sound coming from, there I am, right there, is coming from right there.
Right.
And
based upon how the sound goes around your head and refracts and reflects around.
Exactly. And the shape of your ear canals and your pinna and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. So I knew it would be different, but I was shocked by how different it is. And we say a lot of times, your results may differ in audio. Your results will differ on this. You will give it to, like, Dennis Berger.
Yeah, sure.
Dennis was one of my testers because I knew Dennis's ear canals are actually like really straight, and so he has a different perception of earphones than I do a lot of times.
Really?
Oh yeah,
that I didn't know.
Yeah, and so I was sending him stuff, just sending him the files, and he was drawing out diagrams of where he thinks everything sounded to him, like a spatial diagram. And it was just way off of what I heard. And what David, because David was saying, you cannot virtualize headphone sound like right in the back. I'm kind of like, it's working for me, but the front doesn't work for me.
Oh, how weird.
Yeah. And so it's all over the map. And but one of the really nice things is you can put on different headphones. As you may have done this. You put on different headphones and you get different results.
Well, I haven't done that yet. I wanted to tell you that I spent my time so far listening to this album on a pair of Focal Clear MG circumoral, that is over ear headphones, big ones, that are open back. Right. So they are not particularly isolating, but they are so clean and so clear. And Focal, as you know, makes really, really great headphones. But I haven't yet done it on some closed back headphones or earbuds, which, I expect to give different results, don't you?
Oh, totally. And that was I think we kind of loosely agreed that, like high-end open back, like planar magnetic headphones by and large, gave the best results. But those are already kind of known for sounding more spacious than closed back headphones do.
Right, exactly.
That wasn't a super big surprise, but we definitely, we were trying it with everything we could dredge up. And, including really high-end stuff, really, really cheap stuff. Some of the stuff I worked on with a $19 pair of JBL, wired earphones, and I did it in the Everett Public Library because I could, and they have good coffee. They have way better coffee there than I have at home.
Wow. Okay. So, you did some of these tracks in Dolby binaural, in Apple binaural, which virtualize objects out there in the world coming from different angles and reaching your ears. You also did it in David Chesky's own virtualization system called Mega Dimensional Sound. You need a Darth Vader voice to say that, I think. But that meant you had to learn yet another DAW, right?
Well, no, I didn't, because he had done those all himself. And I still haven't bugged him too much, but I really want to find out what he's doing, because there's actually a thing on there where I took a track off of his Graffiti Jazz album, right? Which is really an extraordinary work of immersive sound. It's jazz, but it's a lot of electronica sort of stuff. And it's one of the best spatial audio recordings I've heard. And it's not in Atmos or DTSX or what's the other one? I can't remember.
I can't remember it now either.
That's bad.
But
anyway,
with age comes blissful forgetting.
True. But I listened to his stuff, and then I said, David, how about if I try? We have a demonstration of like your thing, because you're trying. I mean, ultimately, he's trying to push his thing, right? Sure. So why don't we try to take your thing, and you send me the actual tracks, right? Which I couldn't believe he did it.
Yeah, really.
I assumed he was going to refuse,
right?
But he did. He's like, oh yeah, sure, and he sent me the tracks, and I sat there for many hours.
You actually mixed them.
I mixed the tracks in Atmos.
Yeah.
Going through the Dolby encoder and the Apple encoder, and tried to get as close as I could to David's results. And I assumed I spent like 2 nights on this, and just on one track, just experimenting with, because there's some stuff that goes behind your head in there. It's really cool sounding. And
it is.
I thought, like, I really kind of figured like I'll be able to match what he does, but I couldn't. And granted, it's David, who's been doing this more than me. I'm an audio writer, and also, it's his own tune, right? Like I could maybe mix my own tune better than David could. I don't know.
Somebody else,
but,
right?
Yeah, so he had some advantages, but for all my trying, and he said, that's actually pretty close to what I intended. The stuff that I did. So he's like, yeah, let's put those in there. And we did. And there's also, I can't remember how many tracks, like 8 or 10 tracks that are Audiophile Society recordings. And he refused to pick them out. He just said, here's everything we have. You pick out, whatever your 10 favorite recordings are. And I did. And that's the ones that we ran with. And
that part of the album is quite good. I mean, I was listening to these tracks, and there's a wide range of genres and styles and effects and ideas. I mean, David's a pretty amazing guy.
Yeah. And obviously he has artists. I mean, like 2 of the tracks were his, I think. But there's, multiple artists on here, and
but very creative, very inventive stuff.
He had, I'm sure, a lot of, but there's some like traditional classical stuff on here. But with the non-classical stuff, I'm sure he had a giant influence on the sound of those, because a lot of those get that immersive sound that he's able to get. There's one from, I don't know if Cafe is the name of the album or the artist or whatever, but I think it's the best immersive recording I've ever heard on any through headphones, on any format, anything. I forgot to mention, you don't need anything special to listen to this.
This is important. Let's make a point of this.
So anything
all you have to do is listen on any pair of headphones connected to any sound system source. Doesn't have to be anything special at all. This is really important.
Yeah, like a cheap little, you can put it on a cheap little dongle. Your computer or your phone may actually have the capacity to play these things on their own, but I used a lot of just like a cheap little DAC dongle. Foci Audio and Shanling and people like that make them for $50, $75 or whatever, and those can all very easily do this, and they can drive also most headphones to.
Right. I was using a Focusrite Scarlett Solo.
That'll work.
Audio interface, which is wonderful. And just playing it off the Mac. I found, by the way, that the Cafe, I believe is the name of the group, Forças de Natureza. Wonderful recording. Oh my God. The deep bass drum that's in there and the vocals. Everything about it is just wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're in a giant space.
Yes, yes.
Probably to a greater degree than anything I've ever heard on headphones. And I've heard, a lot of binaural recordings and
Sure.
all sorts of, a lot of, traditional stereo recordings with, stereo mics and things. And it is really shocking. It really sounds like you're in some giant reverberant space.
Yeah. It really is good. I wanted to ask you, most of the tests are David saying 0 degrees right in front of you. Mm-hmm. And then you hear 3 drum hits, and then you hear 3 shaker shakes. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious why you chose those sounds. Drum hits, I can sort of tell. It's an impulse. It's very immediate, very sharp attack. But the shakes are kind of more amorphous, shall we say.
Well, I trusted David because he's done so many of these discs before. Mm-hmm. And I originally did, when we were doing the initial demos for this, I did them all. And my voice is not particularly great. Not that David's is either. But, David hated the microphone I was using. He insisted on using some like Josephson audiophile microphone that was like a few $1,000s and stuff. I'm kind of like, all right, whatever. And and he has used the shaker on, I think the very first Chesky test disc that came out in the early 90s. So it's a bit of a tradition for him. And I would agree with you. The drum really kind of lights up the immersive sound a lot more than the shaker does. Mm-hmm. But, my attitude was like, you know what? David's done a bunch of these things. Let's just go with whatever David wants to do.
For whatever he wants to do. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to work on a project with a guy who's really respected, who, it's almost like if you're doing headphone measurements with Sean Olive. It's like,
right.
No one's going to argue.
Right.
And so with David, it's like, look, David has a colossal track record of doing all this stuff. And so I'm just, no one's going to, you're never going to get fired for just going with what David wants to do.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I listened to most of the tracks pretty carefully, and I found that with these headphones, in particular, the Focal Clear MGs, open back, closed ear, I was able to get the horizontal angles pretty well. Mm-hmm. The vertical angles I was having a harder time with. But that's just me. And maybe that's just those headphones.
Well, it's a combination of a lot of things. It could be you. It could be those headphones. It could be that these binaural encoders are not perfect.
True enough.
I would argue that the capabilities of, Dolby Atmos over headphones have been oversold. You, especially when we do the blind test, it's like, wait a minute. And there's so often where I was going like 0 to 180 and I'd edit, and you're editing, taking these little tiny snippets and putting them all and they are all individual tracks. So these track things go on forever. And, and you're putting theirs, and I'd be like, okay, 0, 180. And then it'd be like, and I go back to 0 degrees forward. I'm kind of like, wait a minute.
Is that different?
It sounds the same. And I have to keep going back and checking, which was really laborious. Oh my God. I checked so many times because I couldn't be sure just from listening. I mean, I could hear, hard left and hard right.
Sure.
That was easy to do. Everything else was difficult to do.
Elevation to me was difficult to do. I found it very interesting in the comparisons. You have tracks of the same thing done in the Dolby encoder and the Apple encoder. And I found the Apple encoder to have a lot more ambience to it.
Yep, I thought so too.
Almost like you were in a different kind of a room. There was more reverberance in the sound. It wasn't as dry. You found the same thing?
I found exactly the same thing. I guess it's like Apple, since Apple has been so active in promoting immersive sound, more so than Dolby has even. I just figured like Apple probably heard the Dolby encoder. They have a ton of great engineers there. And they probably said, we could make it more immersive than this. And they did. But I think the Dolby encoder sounds more audiophile and pure.
I agree. Exactly so.
So
I wonder if Tom Holman was at Apple when they developed that, because he was head of audio for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he was more on he's better known as like a speaker guy.
True.
So I really don't know. But are they the biggest company? They're certainly the top 3 or 4 or 5. So the kind of resources they have are just immense.
Tremendous. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So they could buy great coders and they did their own thing. But whether or not you like the Apple or the Dolby version is very much a matter of opinion, which I just love. I hate it when I have to, as a reviewer, I love it when I can not make up my mind.
Right. Well, I, as a reviewer, I have to tell you that I often refer people to you because I really trust your reviews.
Oh, thanks. Thank you so much.
And, when people ask me, how come I can't go to a store and compare this and that? I say, well, because brick and mortar stores are on their way out. What you really need to do is rely on reviewers you trust, such as Brent Butterworth.
Well, that's really nice of you. I wish I could help more, but I work for Wirecutter now, and we are so mass market that I think the most expensive thing we've ever touched in audio is like a $600 pair of bookshelf speakers. So all these people are like, "Hey, what $2,000 tower speakers do I get?" I don't know.
I don't know. I don't listen to those anymore.
Go look at Aaron Hardison's YouTube channel or something like that.
Okay, well, there you go.
There's a lot of guys out there who, I'm the old. You and I both are the old guard because we started kind of.
I'm afraid so. I totally accept that. Absolutely.
There's a lot of young guys who have a lot more energy and feel like lugging speakers around and stuff like that.
I remember those days.
Yeah, I'm a little less eager to tote 100-pound subwoofers around nowadays.
Damn straight.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention about the overhead tests. Okay, so you have some tests that start in front of you and go up, I don't know, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 45, 60, 90, and 120 and 180 behind you. But they're discrete. I found it pretty difficult to deal or to perceive them as that front to back, but left to right, I had a much easier time for some reason. But the one thing I wanted to say, if I had been involved, I might have suggested, was instead of doing discrete places, was to have a continuous sound move overhead from left to right or front to back. You see what I mean? I don't know what kind of sound it would have been.
See what you mean, and I kind of wish I had thought to do that, because had I thought to do that, I would have done it. But you can see there's a ton of tracks in this thing, and this project,
you're already
this took a significant chunk out of my life.
I'm sure that it did.
And and I honestly wouldn't have done it except for David Chesky. I just have so much admiration for him, and just it's like. You're a bass player. If I got to go play with, Chris Potter or somebody like that, even though I suck way too bad to play with Chris Potter, it would be, I would go do it for nothing. I would fly to New York at my own expense and go do it just to do one gig with him, just to say I did a gig with him.
Right.
Maybe he watches this and he'll, call me.
And he'll call you and he'll say, "Hey, come to New York.
You can play one tune with me." I do it for one tune.
Yeah. I believe
it's kind of like that. Yeah. So it was, but I was sitting there trying to think of what more could we put on here. And I think I did think of a couple things towards the end. I'm kind of like, no, David wants this thing out. If if I start doing this, we're going to be going down a rabbit hole,
and it's going to just last forever, and it's never going to get published. I know that feeling.
Yeah, it might have been 2 more since this is all experimental. Nobody's ever done this before, at least in a available recording.
Yeah.
It was all totally experimental. So there was no, we had no guidelines. We had nothing. We were just guessing at what to do.
Well, I think what you did do is fabulous. Really great. It gives people an opportunity to try different headphones and see which ones work best, especially in this spatial audio format, one of 3. And it behooves you absolutely to listen to the 10 tracks from the Audiophile Society on headphones and listen to this very spacious, wonderful sound. Unlike many of our colleagues, I really like multi-channel and immersive music mixes. Yeah. When they're done well. I mean, I remember the very first 5.1 mix of a music track I heard was something from the Eagles. And, the cowbell came clanking at me from the surround speaker, and it was just horrible. But since then, people have really learned how to do it well, and it can be just wonderful. So
I agree. The problem is it can be on anything from a speaker that looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's the original Amazon Tap. To a full-on 2.4 whatever system.
Right.
And so in the studio, of course, they mix on all those speakers. And unless you're in the very small number of people that have, an AV receiver or something that will do that and actually have all those speakers mounted. And in my opinion, it only really works right with the ceiling speakers mounted.
Correct. Rather than the bounce off the ceiling.
Yeah.
Kind.
I mean, those can be kind of nice, but the ceiling speakers are clearly better.
Clearly superior. Yeah.
So they kind of sell it as like this universal format. It kind of works on anything, but that's the shame of it for me, is that you can do incredible things with this format, but then it all ends up being heard through these things. I mean, so few people are able to hear these mixes in the quality that they were supposed to be heard. So few, and it's really it's very sad to me.
But hearing them in headphones opens the experience up to a much wider audience.
Yeah, and I'm hoping. I mean, this is just we're kind of hoping to sort of make people aware of the limitations of this, and so that they can overcome it in the same way like David heard the limitations and thought, I can do better just messing around with my digital audio workstation and doing whatever he does, and he did it. But there's no David Chesky format or plugin you can buy for your digital audio workstation.
Well, I mean, he could make his mega dimensional sound system a plugin, couldn't he?
I'm sure he could. In the same way that people like Chris Lord-Alge have their own, famous mixer guy, have their own plugins for whatever with their own presets and all that, and a lot of which I use for my own music. But he could, but I don't think David wants to give away his secrets.
Well, I'm not talking about giving it away.
Well, I mean, if he could charge a lot of money for it, but
yeah.
I really wish he would, because I'd use it. I'd absolutely use it. Whereas for me, doing an immersive mix of my own music with like Atmos or something is, at my level, I'm a jazz artist, who nobody's ever heard of, except for writing about speakers. And so at my level, it doesn't warrant the effort, since everything I do is going to get heard on headphones. And yeah, I can do some things in there, but if I could do like what David does and put out special immersive mixes of my music for headphones, I would absolutely do it. I just cannot achieve that level of quality. Although I may my next project I think is going to be a little more weird stuff, not like traditional jazz. So I might be able to do a little more sort of interesting things. We'll see.
Well, I'll look forward to hearing that. Absolutely.
Ukuleles flying around.
Yeah, man. Well, we have a link to this album on the audiophilesociety.com in the show notes, so you can go and order it. I believe it's $25,
something like that. Yeah,
$24.99.
I can't remember.
Yeah, it's something around.
I haven't bought one, so
right. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, and that's certainly very reasonable for something of this quality. And definitely, I can highly recommend it, having listened to it. And I want to thank you so much for being here to tell us all about it.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, good. Well, hope to have you on again sometime soon.
I'd love to do it. Absolutely.
Great. Thanks.
Okay.
So those of you who are listening to this, if you have a question for me, please send it along to htg@twit.tv. And I will answer as many as I can right here on the show. And as always, we thank you for your support of the TWiT network with your membership in Club TWiT, which gives you access to all the TWiT shows in their video form and lets you see a bunch of cool graphics in addition to hearing a bunch of great information. So thanks for that. Until next time, geek out.